Hi, I'm Elyzabeth Trickey, the author of The Final Rider, which is my debut novel, and I'm here today to talk about my writing journey. And you may be asking a question right now of why the hell you should care about what I'm saying and how my writing journey went, and maybe you don't. But ask my friends, and at least some of them were interested, so here we go. So, if the stories my parents tell are to be believed, I was a storyteller from a pretty young age. My dad has a pretty often repeated story about when I was a little girl. And my mom was away, doing errands probably. Hello, I've got my little cat right off screen over here if you hear meowing. He's very talkative. Hello. But anyway, my mom was away on errands and my dad was taking care of me while she was gone. And he said that I started to tell him a story. And the only quote from this story that I ever managed to get was the phrase, the quote right here, duck, duck, go swam. If anyone has any idea what that means, I would love to know because I have no idea. Apparently after that, I got distracted by my mother and I never repeated that story. After that, the first story that I actually remember writing, because this previous one I only know because of stories, was one that I wrote right after we moved from a suburb to a farmhouse. And it wasn't much. It was like 2 pages of little kids' handwriting, and little kids' handwriting isn't the smallest. And it was just me finding a chest full of magic gems under a house. That was all. Looking back, it was probably my wife coping with moving because I was quite young. I was only 8 years old, and it was an adventure, but at the same time, I was nervous, probably. I had a nightmare about getting stung by bees, as if bees don't exist in suburbs. So after that story, it did take me a few years to start writing again. I didn't complete any of them, actually. I did count once, it was about 50 different novels that I started, I think between the ages of 8 and 14, I want to say. Some of them got to about 50 pages. One of them multiple of them actually only lasted 1 page. I found one document in my Google Drive that was only a title. The document itself was blank. I have no idea what it was meant to be, but I do actually have still a document that I called plots or something like that because I thought that writing a plot was just writing the little description that you get on the back of a book. And so that's what I did. I wrote the descriptions on the back of the book and thought that that was enough for me to write a full novel off of. Putting the cart before the horse was a common theme of my childhood. The actual first attempt at a book that I wrote was it went mostly untitled. I think I just called it The History of the Unicorns or something. And considering that this was like a 10, 11-year-old writing, you probably already know where this is going. It was me as a self-insert with my real name, and 2 friends that unfortunately I'm no longer in contact with, who we were like 13, 12 years old, something like that. And for some reason we lived alone on a farm with a bunch of horses, and my horse was a unicorn because I was so special. And then the unicorn got kidnapped. We had to go to another world to save it, and it was the first evidence of my obsession with elves that was cultivated by me being essentially raised on Lord of the Rings. Because I had these things called Starlight Elves, and all of them had stupid names. One of them was named Starlight on the Moon. No, I'm not joking. This phase, as I said, it carried on for a few years, starting books, not completing them, which you'd think that would mean that none of it was really all that memorable, but there is one character. She first showed up in this, and pay attention because she comes back 2, 3 more times, something like that. was clearly going through an edgy phase at this point because I thought I was going to write a book series that was all about villainesses. Even though most of the time they weren't the main character, even an anti-hero, they were usually the antagonist, and the book was actually about whoever was on a quest to take them down. And yet I still thought it was about the villainesses. I don't know. Don't question a preteen's logic. I'm speaking from experience. Sometimes there just isn't any. But there was one. I think it was my first time trying to write an anti-hero. And it was about an assassin named Sophronia. And as it started, it was a pretty simple, basic assassin story. Assassin is sent on a mission, falls in love with the target, learns that there's more to life than murder. That's it. That's all that I was going to do with it. It wasn't very creative, but again, I was 12. And obviously, I did end up abandoning that one for quite a while. So we'll get back to her later. Got my little notebook here. Let's see. After that, actually, this is exciting. After that, I finally did my very first completed draft of a novel. I did for NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. I barely hit the 50K words. I haven't gone back to read it in years, which is probably a good thing, but it was called Rising Storm. And I still think that in some ways it was interesting. I might actually revisit the general concept of it. It was about a woman who was a hero. It was a generic chosen one type story. The main character was found by a talking wolf and a warrior and told that she was destined to save the world, but as it turned out later, she had already been this chosen one, but it was so tough on her and weighing her so much that they wiped her memory to try and let her live a normal life. But then the big bad never went away. It just kind of let her go while the big bad was still around. I don't know what the logic behind that was, but that's what I did. Again, it just barely reached the 50K max minimum for the NaNoWriMo. So as you can imagine, for a story that was meant to be an epic fantasy, it did not quite hit the mark. Shortly after that, I discovered anime, and then for years, I was so convinced I was going to be a mangaka. I even studied Japanese for several years because of that, and despite having my minor in it, I still don't speak that much anymore, I think. But it was a lot of, if you'll pardon my language, a lot of very, very weeby crap. Lots of slice of life stuff, lots of isekai, that general type of thing. Except I feel like mine was much more female focused than most isekai, which feels like progress. But there's actually one idea in this long, long series of manga that I thought of and imagined and even did a few character designs for, but never actually made. And that was called The Black Rose. Now, The Black Rose will actually come back later as another project that I did, but none of the others have so far, although there's one that's been rattling around in my mind a little bit, so maybe a future video will be about that, or at least mention it. And then, I actually can't remember how long this manga phase lasted, but eventually I did get back to regular writing again. I do actually know exactly who I can attribute it to, though, because I went to a Japanese language immersion camp, and one of the other girls who was there had brought a book with her to read. She couldn't read it at the camp. We weren't allowed to have anything written in English except for Japanese textbooks. So she brought it with her and put it away to read on the way home, and it was the book Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. And it seemed interesting, so as soon as I got home, I got it from the library, I read it, and then immediately bought the paperback, and then I immediately bought the hardcover of book 2, and there are many Sarah J. Maas books here, many more above that you cannot currently see. My Maas Trash video may be another video to come. We'll see. Anyway, I read Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight, and I started getting back into other fantasy. my reignited interest in fantasy novels led to me writing an entire trilogy. Actually, I wrote it in 3 years. I'm not going to release the name because I tried to self-publish it and it's still out there. I cannot scrub its presence from the internet no matter how hard I try. And I'm not happy with it for a few reasons. It wasn't well plotted, it wasn't well written. I think I did a very bad job with representation, and I'm recognizing that as the flaw that it is and trying to distance myself from the mistake that it was. But it was my first time not only fully writing a first draft, but also then editing it and writing out plots and writing query letters. Actually, I tried very, very hard to get this actual pile of crap published. And I wrote dozens of query letters, queried dozens of agents. More than dozens, actually. If I were to count, it would probably be well over 100, and none of them got back to me for reasons that in hindsight were very, very obvious. But sorry, my cat is causing trouble off the screen again, and he's very distracting. Anyway, it was a full epic fantasy trilogy. It had prophecies, it had romance, forbidden romance. It was big, and there were so many characters, multiple POVs, gray moralities, and all of that stuff. And looking back at it, while I am not entirely proud of it, and I don't think it's one that I'm going to revisit to try and remake, but I view it as a good learning experience, and it definitely changed the way that I approach writing and the way that I approach the ideas that I have. I look at them with more of a critical eye, and I do research before I commit to any of them. Also, upon the completion of the third book, it did bring my completed first draft count to 5. I wrote 5 books, only 3 of them got edited at this point. Around this time, I also wrote another novel that I only completed the first draft of. And this was the one about Sophronia, her very first completed draft, and so far her only completed draft. I had moved on from the whole concept of assassin falls in love with her target. I think that is a bit on the overdone side. No offense to anyone who is writing that. There's nothing wrong with something being overdone. Enjoy what you write. That's the only rule. But instead she was sent on her mission, and she found out that the target was a little girl. And suddenly everything that she'd learned and thought she'd known, and all of the poison that had been poured in her ears, and she herself was a little girl, suddenly started to ring false. And she decided that she couldn't go through with it. Which, again, is not a perfect story, but I think it showed a lot of growth. I think it really improved the way that I was starting to view morality and romance, and because there was also romance in it. She was falling in love with a general. And aside from that, it wasn't much. I spent a lot of time describing pretty dresses. I spent a lot of time trying to show how badass she was without actually succeeding in showing how badass she was. um, but even after that somewhat disastrous attempt, I didn't give up on Sophronia. She's still in my brain today, and I'm still working on her. But following the failed attempts to publish my first trilogy, and also other failed attempts to publish Sophronia's story, I made the decision to move on. Clearly these two that I'd written weren't it. They weren't there yet. Sorry if my cat is meowing again. He's very talkative and he's right behind the camera. Come here. Or not. Okay, that works too. The kitty cat in question, he's my little void. He's a little troublemaker. Go on. Anyway, I don't know how long this video has been yet. I kind of expected it to be longer, but without focusing on each individual thing I tried to write, which is a good thing. You don't want to hear all of that. It wasn't good. um, Not a whole lot happened really. It was a lot of false starts, a lot of attempts, a lot of ideas that I let drift around and fester in my head without ever being used. But then one day, this is where this one starts to come in, came my biggest so far learning experience when it came to writing. So, I live on a farm. For anyone who's watching and doesn't know that, because I'm pretty sure it's mostly going to be my friends watching. Hi. I'm not going to name drop any of you in case you don't want it, but hi, you know who you are. um, and my mom was going to build a little rock field for the gutters to run off into to direct it away from her flower gardens. And I was helping her collect the stones from our sheep pastures because there were a few that were scattered around the edges right near the fences. And we were tossing them over, and as we tossed more and more, of course, they would start landing on each other, and they'd make these loud cracks. So it's like one stone landing hard against the other one with all of the weight of its gravity. And pretty sure this thoroughly convinced my mom that I was crazy, but I turned to her and I said, "Can you imagine what it would be like if one of these rocks cracked open and there was a dragon inside?" I don't know where that thought came from. I really have no idea how I ever got anywhere close to that idea. But I want to say that I was about 18 at this point. I was finishing off my associate's degree, and I was getting the next year I'd be getting ready to go to a proper college to get a bachelor's degree. And that thing that I said, it's stuck in my head, and I kept thinking about it. And it morphed from just the vague concept of, oh, dragon and rock, isn't that funny, to the underdog finds a dragon. And thus started the very first draft of what would become the final rider. It started off very differently than it ended up, which, if you have heard other authors speak, this isn't a surprise. So often the first chapter, the first prologue, the first few pages, even the first draft as a whole will get completely tossed aside in favor for better ideas that come later, which is important. It is a very good way to write, to approach what you've written critically and decide, this no longer works. Even if I love it, this no longer works. But I can do this instead. And it started with the main character, Hazel, working on a farm. And she was pulling out rocks from a river to complete a wall for a new pasture. When one of them cracked open, and lo and behold, there was a dragon inside. I don't know why I find that so funny, because it's not. It's really not. I just have a very strange sense of humor. Anyway, it took me quite a while to finish this book. I wrote it on and off while I was at college, the proper sleepaway college, as I was calling it at the time, because it was my first time staying in a dorm room. And it took me meeting a very good friend of mine. If you watch this, you also know who you are. Plus a month of NaNoWriMo to actually finish the first draft. Oh, no, longer than the month of NaNoWriMo. I started it, and then when NaNoWriMo started, I made a separate document of just what I was writing during that month, and then it took me to January to actually finish the first draft. But the first draft was almost 150,000 words. It was actually both what is now the final rider and the Wasteland Queen as one book. So it was a very long book, especially because once I had done some editing, not much, not as much as I should have done, I didn't make it any shorter. It was about a 400-page novel, but I was trying to get traditionally published as a debut author. For those who aren't familiar with the publishing world, that is very, very rare. Your agent has to 100% believe in your novel to be willing to publish a 400-page book as your very first novel to be released into the world. So obviously, it didn't work out. And but there was one agent. I think I caught her right before she left the agenting game to become an author herself, actually. And I received the longest email I have ever gotten from any agent so far. And it changed my life, actually. She said that my book had so much promise. It just needed the critical eye of an editor and a few more edits, and it would be something amazing. And she explained that she wasn't going to be an agent for much longer, so she herself couldn't help me. But she offered me a list of editors that would give me a discount if I mentioned her name. And she encouraged me to ask any questions I wanted, and she would take whatever time she had to answer them. And I did, and she did. And one of the most important things that she said to me was, no matter what happens, is to be proud. How many people at your age have written a full book of this length and gone to the trouble to edit it and try to publish it? Now, I'm sure that number is probably bigger than I would have guessed at the time, but it's still a minority of the population. And that did make me feel happy and proud. And I did get an editor. I got two editors, actually. The first one was for the doorstopper that the original draft was. And actually, it has grown since then. The first draft was split into part 1 and part 2, which were both shorter than what they are now as separate books. And it gave me so much hope to just keep on pushing on, even after I decided maybe this isn't working. And then I split it into 2 books, and I hired an editor for just the first book, and she was so friendly about it. Like, she was honest. She wasn't sugarcoating things or kissing my ass and trying to make me feel happy about what I wrote. She was pointing out the obvious flaws, the not so obvious ones that I could improve. And also saying what was nice, what she liked, what to do more of. And that also changed the way that I write. Because when I do the first draft editing, I don't just focus on, oh wow, this sucks, I need to change this. It's now, I did this well. I should expand on this. I should incorporate this general concept that I have here that is so nice, or this general style I have here, into more of the book to make it more of a cohesive whole that is also nicer to read. And that took a while. It took me a while to properly finish editing. And then I went back to the querying hole. It had been 6 months. I still wasn't getting any responses. But I had also at that point started reading more self-published books. It was not a foreign concept to me before, but not something I'd ever properly read in my life. In fact, what we have here are some books from one of my very first self-published authors that I'd ever read. Savage Beauty, Omen of Stones, When Wishes Bleed, and many more of her books up there by Casey L. Bond. And I've been reading these, I've been collecting them. Most of my books of hers are signed. I'm covering up my real name there, but she wrote a little paragraph for me because I was asking for advice and well-wishing on writing, and she did it, and I was so happy when I opened these books to read what she wrote. It was an actually amazing experience, and I'm so happy that I had that there, which was one of my very first connections with an author. My actual first connection was up in my signed Air of Fire, which I'm not going to get out right now because it is behind two very precarious pop figures that I don't want to knock over or move and then knock over. It was Sarah J. Maas. I got it signed. I said I was an author, and she wrote me a good luck message. And both that book and these books and multiple others that I have got signed with good luck wishes from authors have been bolstering me. But anyway, back on point. When I was wondering if maybe the traditional publishing path wasn't for me, I emailed Casey L. Bond and I asked her how she chose self-publishing and how the journey has been for her, and a few other technical questions like how much do you usually expect to spend on an editor or on a cover artist? And she did get back to me. And she said that ideally I would have gotten an agent, but I had faith in my books. This isn't a complete quote, this is a paraphrase. And she decided to go for it anyway. I moved forward. I made the significant choice for me at the time as someone who was unemployed when all this was going down to invest in a cover artist. And she made this for me. I made the decision that because the cover artist was so expensive, I was going to learn to do everything else. That I was going to do it as professionally as I could, and I devoted so much time. I learned how to draw maps, and I made my own map. I learned how to use Adobe InDesign, and I did my own formatting. I made my own chapter headers, my own scene separators. I spent months and months working to try and make myself known, putting my stuff out there, trying to reveal who I was to the world as an author. And I'm going to be honest, I'm still struggling with that. I'm struggling to get a foothold in social media. I was doing so well for a while, but then something changed and all of my interactions started dropping like flies. And now I'm still working and trying to get that back up between now working a full-time job and trying to write and keeping up relationships and friendships and life stuff and trying to have hobbies so that my whole life isn't work, work, work. But my writing journey is still ongoing. This isn't so much as a the end as a to be continued. Because I've got 3 more books of this to write. Well, technically 2. I've finished the first draft of book 3. Now I need to edit it. I'm continuing to dread writing the final book because writing the final book is scary. I am still working on other ideas. I'm still coming up with concepts every day that I scribble down for later. I've almost finished the first draft of my very first fantasy romance, entitled Shackled. Maybe I'll be talking about that on this channel someday. I hope so. I can't really cross my fingers. And in short, if you take anything away from this as an aspiring author yourself, let it be that writing, not writing itself, but the process of writing, of becoming an author, doesn't have an end or happily ever after until you choose to. This actually goes for any pursuit of yours. It doesn't end until you decide to make it end. And maybe there are times when that will be the best choice for you. That's up to you, not anyone else. There were people who would have seen me stop writing, I think. People who didn't like what I had written, people who didn't believe that I could do it. There was one person who did discourage me at every single turn. I won't be mentioning their name because they do not deserve to be mentioned. Anyway, ending this on a lighter note. The Queen of the Wastelands. My second book will soon be up for pre-order. Actually, I think the ebook is already up for pre-order on Amazon. It is $4.99 on, but it is also on Kindle Unlimited. The Final Rider, the very first book, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Booktopia, Waterstones. It is basically everywhere you can find it. It is also available as an ebook and Kindle Unlimited on Amazon. You can find me on Instagram as Elyzabeth with a Y and Rose Royse. It's a stupid name, I know, I'm sorry. I am on Instagram under Elyzabeth Trickey, and that is tricky with a key like key. And I have a Facebook group under the same name. I haven't done anything with it yet, but it's there if you want to join it. Anyway, thank you for watching, anyone who stuck around for this long. If you haven't stuck around for this long, thank you for sticking around however long you did. And my little kitty has come back to scream and wiggle. And with, and with that, I bid you adieu.